Okay, hello everyone. And you'll notice today that we don't have a guest because what we've decided to do is a bit of a wrap up episode. So um, again, we've had 8 webinars so far. So we've decided for season one that will probably be the end of it. So what we've decided to do is have a little chat and wrap up the 8 webinars that we've had. I suppose, lads, if I take you back 3 or 4 months, this was never the intention. Ed, particularly, and Alan were furiously planning for another conference in Cork, and then plans were all in place, but the old pandemic got in the way. So I think we quickly moved to try and get some of our speakers onto webinars. And I don't know about you guys, but I think we've been really fortunate and really lucky to have all the people come on and contribute, and we've had some great content on the webinars so far.
Yeah, I agree. It felt a bit funny because the vast majority of the work that the four of us do in the lead up to the event is done before the event. When the event happens, it kind of takes care of itself. So yeah, it was what it was. But it was great though with the response we got from our speakers to jump on the webinars, and no one better to do that than Sarah Kelleher on the first one. It was great because for a few reasons. She was a past pupil from CIT herself. She's a Cork woman and plying her trade at the elite level of coaching and leadership within the corporate sector as well as the sporting domain. And I just thought it was a great one to start with because of the messages that she I suppose shared with us, but also her own approach to how she does what she does.
Yeah, one of the key things that instantly stood out for me was when she talked about her flourish model and a ratio of 5-to-1 of positive to negative. And she just very easily asked, like, if you think yourself what your self-talk is like, how many of you are at that ratio of 5-to-1? And that made me take a big kind of a step back, even on the spot there. And I was instantly thinking through my own coaching and through the athletes I work with, and how many of them ever really are at a 5-to-1 ratio, and just how she spoke about increasing the kind of potential and decreasing the interference you have when you coach your athletes. And that was like one of the key things that stuck with me straight away from Sarah's talk.
Yeah, I agree. I think from my notes as well, and just reflecting on her talk, I was really interested in hearing about how she did her work with her hockey group, particularly the England under 18s, about her use of storytelling and her setting up of a creativity camp, but the use of storytelling to understand the individual and the person and the journey that they've come from, and to use and you know the research behind storytelling as a powerful medium is there, but how understanding everybody's stories and journeys kind of united the group. But then she moved in later on in her talk talking about the creativity element. And I really liked the little project that she gave the girls, where they would look at either a role model or a performer within the hockey world, and maybe a skill or an action that they did, and then trying to practice and develop that and putting that little project around them. I thought that was a really nice little home project for the group to go away and come back and demonstrate what they'd learned about the skill and about the person as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the things that stood out to me as well. And I think it's really tricky what she's trying to do, trying to get that balance between challenging people and supporting them. And that's why it was really nice to get all the practical examples of the things that she's trying out to do that. And I know you talked about storytelling, and for me, the key aspect was the listening to the athletes. So really taking the time to listen to the athlete's stories and respond to those stories and build that into the coaching actions that she's taking. And I thought that's, it's so tricky to get that balance between support and challenge. But what she illustrated was just how important that listening is to enable you to get that balance right.
And that wasn't even just between the coaches and the athletes, but even how she discussed how they pair up athletes together to discuss things that they might have saw were going well for an athlete or not going well at a particular time, and that buddy system of them being able to work together. But even the fact that the amount of work that she and her coaching team get them to do with even Lego building and creating a physical, actual visualization of what they're trying to build. I loved it. I genuinely, it was an incredible way to start the entire webinar series.
I think as well, it made me reflect. I kind of wanted to be in one of the squad shoes of what must it be like in that environment. So I kind of got the sense that it would be an element of psychological safety. So the opportunity to be creative, to try, to fail, but also it would be challenging as well. And the balance between those two. I mean, she chatted about that flow model, and creating that environment where people can flow. But yeah, it looked like it was an environment where mistakes were actually welcomed and encouraged in order to facilitate that learning.
Yeah, even the main aspect behind that, that I found quite interesting is that she was very open in the fact that that takes quite a long time, and that when they start, they make it very much an open aspect of encouraging people to fail. But then as they start to get comfortable in that uncomfortable zone, that's when they start to scale up their intensities as they get more towards competition end. So it wasn't just a failure is everything that we do, but they then challenged each other as they went forward to develop on those things that they were failing on. And even from going to identifying things that their role models in sport would do and how they could bring that then into their own practice, where the athletes would design their sessions based on a role model and how they could develop those. I found very, very interesting.
I think one of the things that the final kind of stages as she was beginning to wrap up, one of the things that I think she mentioned on a number of occasions was this teaching people to celebrate. And it's almost like I question in, you know, how much of what we do, and it's kind of linked to something I think I saw recently on Twitter about, you know, does schooling actually rob us of our inherent creativity? Does it rob us of things where we may like to be or want to be overt about things, but we're being told, you know, you got to fit into this particular box, and in class we do, this is how you behave. And I think that you know, teaching people how to celebrate, I thought was just lovely, because it kind of it lended to that freedom of expression, which then took us nicely into the next week, which was with Keith Davids, where he speaks about an environment where everyone has a voice, an environment where there's co-design between athletes and coaches, an environment where the environment is as much a teacher as anybody, as an individual, and not just an individual, but if we actually allow ourselves to relax a little bit more, the environment has actually given us an awful lot of things to work with.
Yeah, I find that very interesting in the fact that even the schooling system and how that general to specific, not being general versus specific, was even really evident in the school setting, and how they can approach the PE curriculum in order to encourage people to be better movers, and how that kind of linked to the learning to learn aspect from Keith's talk, which is what I found one of the most interesting parts of that. Is, do we encourage people to learn enough? And then if we do so, how does that look? Because obviously it was a key topic because of the current global pandemic, but how does learning to learn look? And how do you kind of pull that out of people or push them into an environment to be able to learn? That's something I kind of would have liked to jump into a little bit more. I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, because there are lots of environments where people are given a prescription about how to learn, or are directed or told how to learn. So I think that was an interesting takeaway. I think, like, my reflections on that talk was you know, it was fairly still early on in the lockdown period, and I was really interested in the discussion on the general versus specific training. Certainly within my kind of work within swimming, about how the athletes were doing particular activities outside of their specific environments, and what stuff was general work, general conditioning work, and what could be done that was specific work, that would either replicate or provide a donor element to the stuff that they couldn't do in the pool, or be it in any other environment. That was really interesting. And he obviously referenced Anatoly Bondarchuk and a number of Russian research, and the similarity to the athletic skills model in terms of the general and specific continuums. But certainly haven't seen a lot of the Russian research from Bondarchuk and Verkhoshansky and those kind of guys in Bernstein. There were some seriously good thinkers and good research in those areas. Just a lot of it hasn't been translated. So I think it was really pertinent for me at that time, because that was an area of space I was thinking in within kind of my own current work at that stage.
Yeah, it was. I was intrigued, I've got to say, when the topic came up, because with the COVID situation, you have so many people engaging in or thinking about what way can we practice now that we haven't got access to the typical sports facilities. And you see a lot of, when we think about general training, we think about brain training, or at least I do. I think about general vision training. I think about some of these decidedly dodgy concepts, or concepts without a huge amount of research base. So I was intrigued as to where Keith was going to go with this. And so I think it's a really important topic to bring in and to discuss. But also we've got to be very wary that this isn't a carte blanche to go and do any kind of general training. One of the things that came away from me was that he was saying, you've got to have a really good specific reason as to why you're moving down this very general end of the spectrum. And so I thought that was a really important part to come out with it. And I really liked what he talked about, the training that you do, it probably isn't going to have any immediate benefit. It's not going to have an immediate transfer. But what it might do is it might enable you to benefit from some later training in a better way. It might, as you were saying, Alan, it might help you learn how to learn. I think we need to pay some specific attention to how we help people learn from these more general activities to be able to accelerate their learning in any environment. But I think that was definitely an important one for me, that the benefits that you get out of general training, don't expect immediate transfer with them. They're only setting the scene, or they're preparing you to learn faster, or preparing you to benefit more from some later training that you then engage with. And I thought that was, I said I was intrigued coming into it, and I'm still intrigued going out of his talk. There was so many bits out of that it's going to take me a while over the summer to get into some of that research and to properly digest.
It did very much give you the sense that if you do go to the general end of the continuum, that you have to come back up to the specific side of the continuum for it to really start to potentially transfer to the sport. But even at that, as you said, Phil, what do we classify as general? And the kind of comparison to the athletic skills model, when we look at donor sports, are donor sports something we talk about as general, or is donor sports a completely different segment in itself? And that's something I'm also kind of curious to jump into, is where do we kind of class that, and do they really fit in there, or do they kind of open up our kind of action capabilities that little bit more, so they're not so much a general, but they're a little bit higher on the spectrum? So I don't know, I'm curious about it.
Yeah, I think that probably links us a little bit into the next one, which is Rick Shuttleworth, where he did kind of talk about the the interaction continuum, if I remember correctly, in his model. But I thought those two really worked well back to back, in the aspect that you had a kind of a theoretical research model from Keith, and then Rick actually had some actual tangible examples about where he would have taken some of, particularly the ecological dynamics work, but and some of the work he did with the rugby players and the climbers is really interesting as well, with the light up holes and kind of those constraints that were put on them. So there was a line there between the two in terms of how you take some of the information and maybe apply it in some of the practical aspects.
Yeah, I agree. I think for anyone who's going to look back on Rick's, on any of the first three, there's a couple of things you'll notice is that safe certainty seems to come up consistently through the three of them, and it is incredible to see three very different people, because they are one a former elite level player, now at an elite level coaching, and also contributes heavily in the corporate space. Another, a very true academic, a real philosopher around the space of ecological dynamics, and then a third, a practitioner in the space of trying to improve environments around how coaches engage and the like. And yet all three of them are talking about safe uncertainty. All three of them are talking about creating an environment where people can explore, engage with each other, and engage with the environment. I suppose there's probably a word of caution for anyone who's looking at Rick's talk. When he says this last slide, he doesn't mean this last slide. He says that it's about 15 more last slides. Just it's important to flag that with anyone who's going to look up Rick's talk. But it's brilliant for that, for the practical examples, some incredible footage and examples in a real life setting for people to actually go and look at.
I agree with that completely. It's my kind of number one, the one reason I really look forward to whenever Rick presents. Some of the examples I'd seen before, but there were some new ones that would come in as well. And it really gives you a nice insight as to what you're trying, what you're experimenting with to try and bring about some of the changes that you want. And, that emphasis that he puts on, going for it and trying out and experimenting to try and bring about this adaptability in athletes. One of the more kind of general messages that I certainly took from it was just, thinking about adaptability as one of the end goals, one of the things that we're really looking for with all athletes. And I know we talk about adaptability most of the time in terms of kind of open field sport type situations, and passing in soccer, you've got to be adaptable in terms of how you deliver the ball. But adaptability is hugely important in pole vault. It's hugely important in long jump, in these closed events, because the way in which you arrive at takeoff is going to be slightly and subtly different every time. So how can you adapt to that? Successful performers are the ones who can adapt to those subtle variations in constraints that they find themselves acting under. And so how do we as coaches, as skill acquisition specialists, encourage people to develop that adaptability in an appropriate way, in a progressive way? It's fascinating. And what I really enjoyed about Rick was, again, the ideas that get sparked from some of the examples that he presented.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you always come away really, really energized to think about how you can perturb athletes to create adaptability. Because that was one of the kind of questions that I had got from people who had seen that Rick was going to be presenting, and they was saying, so how do you coach adaptability? What are your thoughts? And the main thing I was saying was, listen to number one, would be the first step. But what I found really interesting was some of the examples he gave back about manipulating the equipment. So if you there's a tennis ball in water, how does that impact its flight projection? And then how is your athlete going to adapt to that? And then even the example he gave with, I think it was Rafa Nadal, and how he used those anchor points and the coupling between the anchor points and their movement. But if you perturb the system, how does that then cause athletes to be adaptable? And I found it just a really nice way to go about it, and you can really take that in so many different directions. But you have to perturb for a reason.
Points. Yeah.
I think it's worth mentioning also, for anyone who's kind of listening to this or goes back and watches some of these episodes, is to the webinars, is that currently a good friend of all of ours, Rob Gray, and his Perception Action podcast, only last night, whenever this is now for you guys, but for last night for me, he had a webinar chat with Stuart Armstrong, Marianne Davies, and Danny Newcomb, and it was absolutely brilliant because they uploaded videos of different practice scenarios that people shared with them or they found, and just discussed all of the possible reasons and rationale behind what they were doing and how they might adapt it, and how they might change it or perturb it or use it, adopt it for another sport. And it speaks very strongly to the work that Rick did, which is, it's not so much that he's not in the place of everything's off the table or everything's on the table. It is all based around, well, what are you trying to achieve? If the rationale for your end point, if there is such a thing, but if you have a strong enough rationale to go after something, well, go after it, because that in itself is going to challenge the system, the athlete in some new way. His concerns, and they'd be similar to mine. The concerns is when we find ourselves doing things just for the sake of doing them. We're doing them because we've seen someone else do it and just copy and pasting it into this environment, or we see it at a very at a particular level, and at an admirable level. Let's say we see it at an elite level, and I'm going to transplant it back to a lower level. And they're the things that I think that when you hear Rick, you begin to realize there's a huge rationale behind everything he does, and it's really it's embedded in the person or the team in front of him there and then. It's not a case of, oh, I've seen this somewhere else, I'm just going to try this with you. No, I'm actually going to try this with you if what I'm seeing in front of me is really calling for this. And I think the big thing that Rick did is that he speaks to this idea of, to fight the urge to just go with what tradition says, go with what the culture has done maybe before. And I think that also, that point was picked up nicely by Stuart Morgan in our next talk, where he took us through his challenges as a golf coach with juniors into adolescents, into adult, and now pros, working with world-class golfers, in that so much of what he does is fighting the traditions and the cultures of the game, fighting against, well, this is what we've always done, and fighting against coaches who speak to him and work with the players he works with, who are doing things just for the sake of doing them, where there isn't that robust rationale for the why of what you're doing. And I think that it almost, it became a thread, I think, through all of the talks. But again, it was that thread from Rick's work into a completely different practitioner, as in Stuart Moore, to show that, again, it comes down to that rationale and what cultural beliefs, resilient beliefs are there that you need to fight against to try and break the athlete into and help the athlete into a different place of exploration.
Yeah, well, I was surprised with Stu, because I'd never seen Stu talk before. So I was surprised. There was actually no technical information in his talk. Like for a golf coach,
Yeah.
for a golf coach, that's, that was surprising for me. But that was my, I suppose, preconception that there was going to be that. But he was very, and he came across very much as a coacher of people and of the golfers, but he didn't come across as an instructor, which, again, my preconception in golf is there are those instructors, those people who prescribe technique, but he was very much a coach of the person. And yeah, I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I found it really interesting in how he went into coping with all of the noise that surrounds the athletes, rather than as you say, the technical aspects of golf. But he spoke so much about everything that comes with it, and the importance of being able to not even block out the noise, but to understand it's there, but it's not an issue. And even, I think one of the kind of key things that stuck with me with that was that he spoke about, when he trains some of his athletes, one of the things they spoke about was never wasting a shot. So there's this concept of every shot has a value, and it again kind of goes against those culturally resilient beliefs that you're talking about. It quite a lot of the times you'll find golf coaches on the range who will be going through a session with an athlete where it's just ball after ball after ball, where it's very hard to then deal with the person. It's more of this is the program I have, so I'm going to go through this program, rather than this is the athlete I have in front of me, I'm going to deal with this athlete. And we saw that as a thread through it, but I found it very interesting when he kind of spoke about it in that area.
And I think what was interesting about, yes, sorry. I think what was interesting about that is that he was seeing this throughout the lifespan. It was with the kids he was working with, and it was with the adolescents he was working with, and it's now with the pro golfers. His approach is still the same. It's about connecting with the athlete and trying to find what works for them, as opposed to, oh no, you're all going to do the same. And his approach is very much about that connection, but also very much, and again, a bit like what we said about Rick, it's about trying to realize, what do they need now? What is their game telling me needs a greater attention?
Really nice story he had of that young female golfer, where he essentially had that process, to borrow your phrase, Ed, of the cut, bleeding, bandage process. Short term, she didn't agree with it, but longer term, she recognized the value. So check that out on his presentation.
Yeah, I think the one big thing that I took, which kind of comes back to what you were saying at the start, Ed, about he's challenging maybe some of these culturally resilient beliefs, or you've got an athlete who's maybe pushing back against some of the ideas that you're bringing in. And he talked about how getting into the research has really revolutionized how he approaches his coaching. I think getting into the research, it gives you confidence to persevere when you're faced with a dominant coaching culture that maybe doesn't agree with what you're doing, or with athletes that are starting to question, where can you find the confidence, not just the ideas, but also the confidence that you're going down the right path. And that, for me, I thought was a fantastic message to hear coming out, that engaging with this research has changed me as a coach. And I could really resonate with that, because I remember finding a particular paper that changed the direction of my PhD. It was one paper that made a massive difference. So it was really nice to hear that. And I'm going to also try and make a link to what you were saying about Rob Gray. So, yes, he's got these fantastic practice analysis videos at the moment, but also you have the journal article conversations that he has. So a group of people discussing a journal article. And so for any coaches who are maybe wondering how I'm doing, reading this research and engaging and interpreting the research, very definitely have a read of one of those articles, and then have a listen to one of those sessions with Rob. It's a really fantastic aid to help you get through to that.
I like. I guess there's a really obvious link, in fact, what you just spoke about there, Phil, to the next talk, which was around research. We had to keep youngsters involved, guys, with Professor Catherine Woods and Dr. Joey Murphy in the next webinar, and I couldn't get over. I was so delighted to see how much of their work is embedded in research, how much of their work is informed by the evidence of what's going on and what has been worked on by other institutions and other research groups around Europe. But it's the same. If we look at all of our webinars are speaking to evidence-based work that informs their practice, which is fantastic, because I completely agree with you, Phil. It's when you have that evidence and you're trying to change something within an environment, that evidence enables you to stay stronger on your principles, because somebody somewhere has gone to the trouble of putting this idea through scientific rigor and empirical analysis. And I think we've all done it. I remember a flight to Finland for a conference with you guys, and I went up the aisle at one point, and I saw Ollie Logan with a research paper out and a highlighter on the flight. We are living, breathing examples of coaches whose work is massively impacted by the research. It's not just things we're pulling out of our sleeve, but it's research. And that's what I think, to keep youngsters involved, that was the resonating fact for me from them. All of what they're suggesting about how we can maintain participation of adolescents in sport and physical activity is supported by research. And that's huge to get that message across.
Yeah, what I loved about that from Keep Youngsters Involved was they spoke about the knowledge center, whose job it is to keep research moving towards the practice element. And it was really funny to hear Professor Kat speak about how at times they were pulling her back to the practical side of things, whereas she was like, we need to get this SLR done, and she was saying, yeah, 100%. And they were always bringing her back to, yes, but the practical element has to be there. And it brings in that experiential and experimental knowledge together. And one of the things I loved was the they mentioned an example of that experiential knowledge where there was a youth council set up in one of the organizations they had worked with, where there was a responsibility on the youth guys and that youth council to come up with ideas as to preventing dropout of kids in that particular sport. And I loved the marrying of those two being so succinct. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important topic. I know they're all really good, but yeah, I came away from that one, and also, you know, Sport Ireland coaching one that I coach kids. It's such an important topic. It's, you know, it is application. It's not just for youth sport dropout, and I think Phil referenced this. It's a toolkit and resources that you can apply across all clubs, across, you know, all scenarios, and they're free as well. So, but you know, so much attention gets put on at the elite end, and, you know, time and resource, but, you know, it's kind of backwards in a way. But it's such an important topic because having kids involved in sport continuously from an enjoyment perspective and a general health and well-being perspective, it can't be understated how important it is.
I think one of the things that I loved about their talk was the idea of drop down versus drop out. That so resonated with me. I hadn't heard that before. Sorry, Phil, you were about to come in there.
Sorry, yeah, I was well. To be honest, Ali, you kind of stole largely what I was going to say, word for word, pretty much. You know, I think it's just such an incredible resource and I was really disappointed. Actually, this is one of the bits that for me would have been fantastic to have there at the conference in Cork, to have the cards, to get coaches into groups, so they're interacting, they're actually doing the card game activity, and they get a practice run through there so that they can go back to their clubs. And I guarantee they would walk into the clubs and go, right, we need to get people together, we need to do this because this will help so much. And it is, as you said, yes, it's you know, primarily designed and geared around dropout, and it's kind of lined up for that. But, you know, at an essence, anybody working in youth sport, especially adolescent sport, you read through these cards, you read through these ideas, and it's a great stimulus just to reflect as to, again, gaining confidence that, yes, I'm doing that. Yes, I'm doing that. Oh, that's a nice idea. This drop down idea, how do we facilitate that? So, yeah, I just thought it was, I say, free resources, all the links there with the YouTube videos to people to go and explore, definitely worthwhile. I'm going to come back just because I think there's a nice link here between what we've kind of been talking about, the kind of the research underpinning this, and the next talk, which is from AIK. So the two guys from Stockholm, you know, one of the really interesting points for me, one of the really important points was that, you know, they're not just looking at research and implementing that into their context. They're looking at the research and they're considering, okay, how do we experiment with this to make this fit our context? Because what we do in Sweden, what we do in AIK is different. It's going to be different to Cork. It's going to be different to Amsterdam. It's going to be different to everywhere else. So it's really important that the research inspires us, but that we're not trying to copycat the research. We're trying to use it to stimulate us to experiment with our practice, so that, and they had a great phrase about, you know, we research us so that we understand ourselves better. And I thought that was a fantastic introduction.
Yeah, and I'm going to slightly steal something that Ed's put out there a few times now, but he stole it as well, so sorry. And it's that term that power fades in the copy. And it just, I found it brilliant. And we've seen it through every speaker that we had and everyone we've spoken about so far, is that nobody's trying to copy and paste something they found somewhere else directly into their setting. And the guys in AIK, with their development of a research unit, it just is fantastic to see a club take that initiative and to be able to say, well, this is what works for us right here. But one of the big things I took away from AIK was the holistic approach to how they look at their club, from the coffee shop being a place that allows kids to interact with each other, in a really open, free environment. And if you can start it there, that then feeds into everything else that goes on, where they're going to be able to interact in the training sessions as well. But I loved that overall approach that they spoke about.
Definitely get a sense of the ripple effect, and that I've no doubt that would have been challenging in football to push against some of those culturally resilient beliefs that exist, and they would have had to start here and it would have had to gradually ripple out. So that takes time and energy and you know, the research and development behind that. Like two examples that I have in my notes and have them circled and in bold. Is one around the questioning of the session plan that the coaches would do, and normally when people do a session plan is they predetermine those coaching points, but Mark was explaining that had an influence on what the coaches were actually looking for, so it directed their attention for predetermined aspects rather than just observing and waiting for those coachable moments. And then the second thing which came from that, which I think applies across a number of sectors, but I think it was in relation to the coaches, and particularly the voluntary coaches that they work with, is when they're providing some education. He said we start where people are at and not where we want them to be. But I've taken that and used that multiple times now in the last few weeks. But he was starting with where people are at and where their knowledge base was, and he was taking them on a journey. I'm sure he had maybe an aspiration or a direction, or the club is a direction he wants to take them, but it's going to the people and starting them on their journey at the appropriate place.
But even the removal of early selection. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that came out from that talk was, and we've said it a few times, like there's almost a bit of a selfishness feel to what we do. We invite people that we want to get more. We're almost dying for the webinar to finish so we can get into even more chat afterwards and stuff. But I think it speaks to it because we would have all known Mark really well, and we all would rate Mark very highly. And yet Mark was the guy who said, I want to bring Dennis on with me. This guy is just world class. He's brilliant. And none of us, I certainly hadn't come across Dennis in the way that we managed to interact with him on the webinar. And it was just fantastic to see even there how they've linked with each other and how they work with each other and the other guys over there, James Vaughan and like. But the overarching thing that Dennis would have spoken about and that Mark has spoken about to us on loads of times is patience. If you're trying to rush this process, you're always going to find yourself catching into, because I'm having to justify why they haven't improved, justify why they haven't moved on, justify why they haven't been able to. And I've always, and we all know, we've all had many conversations with Mark where the discussion is so much about the individual, the child on their personal journey. But it was great to hear that day around that patience, the patience required to allow it to take its course and not feel like you're forcing it in any way.
I think that that takes us on to the Dutch FA talk, which we had our football fortnight on the webinar series with the Dutch FA guys on, and this got a big response. Certainly when I went out there, we had plenty of views on it, whether it was the content or it was a national governing body kind of talking about their approach. And again, much to what we said before, it was research evidence based. But again, some of the concepts they were talking about and how they've linked it together, I thought it was really interesting. Now I haven't actually watched it back. It's on my list to watch back. But again, those guys, they're starting to develop something really good there, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the bits for me, even sometimes it's subtle changes in terminology. So talking about this move away from player pathways towards player journeys, and then again, not just changing the terminology, but helping people understand and see and be aware of just the sheer diversity of journeys that players take and that they go through. So what are the club doing? What is the coaches doing to illustrate what the journey really looks like? And also, what are the club doing to support that? Because it takes an awful lot of support to allow you to do this really well. I'm kind of jumping back a bit to AIK, but one of the things on AIK slides, they talked about 1,500 players and 400 coaches. Now, I did the maths and I got jealous, really jealous. But that's what it takes. You know, if you're going to invest and deliver this really good environment, and you saw that from the Dutch FA as well, what I really enjoyed in the Q&A, and people were asking, well, can you tell us what this looks like? Can you tell us what that looks like? And they were able to go, yeah, well, you've got to do this when you're talking to your board members. You've got to do this on the pitch. You've got to do this with the coaches. And it's that, you know, there's an awful lot of work involved across a whole wide range of areas to make that work. And I thought it was such a nice insight that we got. So I can understand why it got such a good reaction.
Yeah, I think that the content that those guys put up was absolutely a representation of the attention it's got. And one of the things you said, Phil, just triggered something in my head, is not only the shift in terminology, but the shift in imagery from a pyramid to a building, where it no longer gets narrow at the top, where people, and you could see it even in the image, there's people climbing out windows and going up ropes, there's people going up ladders, and that journey is very much different. But avoiding it narrowing towards the top was one of the things that I took away, and I found that shift in imagery to be just fantastic. It was another one of those moments throughout the webinar series where I was like, oof, yeah, that's something that will definitely stick with me.
I think something that also I took away from it is to the knowledge and understanding that now there's a lot of really important discussions happening. And a little bit to almost take it back to the guys at AIK. I know the work that they're doing is beyond AIK. They're speaking with national governing bodies around the world, in Canada and other countries. But I also know that they're speaking with the guys in Holland, because it was Mark who directed us towards Jorgen. But I also know they are also talking to the Department of Methodology in Barcelona, who equally have a very forward-thinking way of challenging the culturally resilient beliefs. And I think the overarching thing in all of this was that the sense that the AIK guys spoke about a values officer. And I was like, a what? Like, I don't know of a sport, let alone a club that has a values officer. But I can already begin to see in the discussions that Jorg and Jan were having with us, that that's embedded in what they're doing, that there's watchdogs within the national governing body, within the clubs, within the teams, to actually make sure that the values that are being put in place are being stuck to, and people are accountable to those values. And I wrote it down in capital, a bit like you, Ali. I wrote it down in capital letters, I underlined it, and then I bolded it, and then I put that underline in a box with huge values officer. I was like, how can I get a values officer into every club that my kids are a part of? Because it's now become the #1 thing that a club should have, in my opinion. It's incredible.
Yeah, likewise, I picked up on that, and it was just, as soon as that came up, I saw it on the slide before they got to it, and I had the question ready to go. I was like, I need to know more about this. I will push back on one word you used there, Ed, which was watchdog. And so I think that's possibly a little bit too strict, too severe a word. I don't know would I quite go as far as watchdog, but certainly that, you know, there's somebody who is embedded. And that's a really important part. You know, they think this is so important.
Maybe they don't have watchdog in Sweden or in Netherlands, so it has a different connotation.
How about a values ombudsman or something? But I do, because I think, and I agree. I agree. That is too firm, Ali or Phil. I agree with you. But it takes us nicely to our last chat, which for me, it was lovely that our last talk was actually bringing us to the earliest point in the lifespan. It was actually taking us right back to where we probably have the biggest impact, and that's with the kids. And everyone on this call, and probably most people listening in, will be aware of the work that I Coach Kids have been doing with Sergio Lerner Barsal, but also to now for us to be aware of the partnership that Sport Ireland Coaching have had with them, and their keenness to encourage greater links and connection with the kids, to encourage greater, I suppose, again, evidence-based interaction with the kids. And I think, again, we very often, and I think it was either Declan or Sheila had mentioned it in their discussion about how we seem to have all of the so-called better coaches at the elite levels, whereas it should actually be flipped around. Surely the better, more experienced coaches should be at those lower developmental introductory levels, so that their experience is so much more valued than them receiving a volunteer coach with no coach education in their background. So which would, of course, then will have a significant, potentially significant negative impact on their experience.
Yeah, and again, I kind of got a similar takeaway to what I had from the Keep Youngsters Involved webinar, and kind of left with the question is, if you were an NGB in Ireland or in any country, like why wouldn't you have this as part of your kind of coach education? It's a free resource. It's research evidence based. You know, it's all about keep the youngsters involved and the child as a person, and coaching the child. It wouldn't make any sense to do anything other than that. But you know, it seems that there are very few bodies have actually taken it up so far, because it's, you know, for a very beginner coach, start of their career, provides them with a huge amount of material that they can go away and allow them to cross this daunting world of beginning coaching and working with kids.
Yeah, but and I agree. The best thing about it for me is that they genuinely really put the child at the center, because quite often you'll hear about a player-centered approach or an athlete-centered approach or child-centered approach, and I think at times there's a misinterpretation of what that really is. But one of the things that echoed in my head was that call of not in the same way, not in the same day, and not at the same rate. And that for me was just fantastic, because it's so true. And again, it comes through the thread of the webinar that we've had, that learning is so non-linear, and especially at that age, to have even those 3 sentences in your head as you go out onto a field is going to have a significant impact on how you approach that coaching session. And that's the key thing for me, because it gives you things to actually mobilize on and apply to your work. And even those 3 sentences, I said, like, they stuck with me, because that in itself is such a simple start. And then they give you so much resources and information behind it that I completely agree with you, Andy. I'm not sure how this isn't on a broader scale in every NGB.
I think I kind of add to that again and kind of reinforce Ollie's point, you know, that we talk about they've created these resources, but they've also created, you know, the workbooks that accompany the online learning. So it's actually quite structured. It's already there. It's a package ready to go. And a lot of the time in skill acquisition, we're looking for low-hanging fruit. We're looking for, well, what are the small changes that we can make in training sessions so that every training session becomes that little bit better, and that adds up over time. And this for me is, you know, it's ready to go. It's one of these, you know, it's right there. It's a low-hanging fruit. Just let's go for it. Let's really push and promote this, because I think it's fantastic. And to borrow one of Sheila's phrases, which again, I've heard it a little bit before and it stuck with me all the way through, you know, developing children is the tide that rises all boats. So if you're interested in more high performance athletes, well, a better quality experience for children will help you get there. If your interest is in promoting physical activity in the general population, well, a better quality sport experience for children will help you get there. If your interest is in personal development, a better quality sport experience for children will help you get there. And so for me, I just think it's, I think they've done a really, really remarkable job. It's not just, you know, it's a partnership across Europe. There's many different groups involved, but I think iCoach Kids is really promising. And so I'm really excited to see, you know, iCoach Kids Plus, which is moving on to work with adolescents, and what they create there. I think it's going to be some fantastic resources.
I really liked one of the things I took away from it as well was there's a couple of elements that is behind the work, and as Sheila and Declan both said, they're almost the spokesperson people for the team behind them. But also, as they mentioned, it's their boss, Michael McGeehan, who is giving them that license to go out and seek good partners, evidence-based partners. And again, it goes back to that position of who are those key people in those key positions, and they clearly have a really key person in a key position to give them that license to go out there. Because even on our call, and I think on our chat afterwards, they were like, you know, guys, if there's anybody else out there that we should be talking to, let us know. And I said, I've already connected with Gordon McClellan from working with parents in sport, and with Richard Shorter, the non-perfect dad guy. And that's from them asking, you know, connect us with people. We want more. And that's the essence, I think, of what I got from that talk, is that they are, and I think it's something we heard from the Dutch FA. It's not the athlete, it's not the player pathway, it's the player journey. And I really got the sense from Declan and Sheila that they are completely involved in finding that player journey, for it to be something that it can be bespoke for everyone's journey. And you can only do that if you're open to meet other people and open to advances in the evidence and advances in the research, but also engaging in it. And I think we mentioned that, like they're having conversations with the vast majority of third level institutions in Ireland, because they're genuinely interested in impacting, number one, on the research maybe, but also impacting on the undergrad future PE teachers, future coaches, future sports scientists with their work, so that they further broaden their reach for the work that they're doing with their partnership with their own work, but also their partnership with iCoachKids, which I agree with you, Phil. The resources are just off the chart, and they're there for people, and they're so user friendly as well. And I think it's certainly, if you're not aware of what these are, it's certainly worth a look. You will not be disappointed with, especially if you're not aware of them. If you're not aware of them, these are things that will transform how you currently coach, and how you approach your coaching kids.
Yeah, and just to pick up that and link it to what Alan said earlier about, you know, what is child-centered coaching, and really understanding what that is. So if you're a coach who's thinking, I'm not sure I fully understand what that is, or that's what I want to be, this is your pathway. You know, these resources really will help you to bring that into your practice.
So those were our 8 webinars, and you know, we've quickly gone through them. I don't think our very quick summaries would have done them any justice, but pulled out some key points. But you know, please, if you are watching this, go take the time, have a look at them. Certainly, I know I want to have a look at them again, because there's some aspects that I just haven't picked up. But lads, I'm going to put you on the spot now. I'm going to ask from the webinar series we've had 8. What are your top 3 takeaways? And given I've asked the question, I might as well go first. So allow you some time to think about it. So I think my top 3 takeaways. I think I've looked at, if I was in the shoes of like a new or a beginner coach, or someone who's starting out my coaching journey, I would be heartened by watching those, and that knowing there's actually some resources that are available to me, in addition to any national governing body stuff, that I can go away, look at, and will provide me some tools and some information that I can go and work with kids from an evidence-based background. So I think that's good. And there's certainly, hopefully, that I can take that and share that with kind of my coaching network, or for those new coach beginners. I think and it's probably driven from the football ones we had, is that a lot of people's attention is directed towards the top end of sport and the elite end of sport, when actually it's completely the wrong way around. So we should have, if all was well, have seen more people tuning in and watching the keeping youngsters involved and the sport Island coaching, iCoachKids aspect. But it's just not the way of the world. So it's a little bit disappointing for me, if I'm being honest. So how can we get more people interested in I suppose the base level, to get more resource in there? And then the last one is, I'm probably driven on a reflection from Keith and Rick's talk. Again, there's some great information in there, but for a new coach, or for someone who's not as familiar with the language, is what can we do to make that more accessible? Because I'm sure for someone who wasn't so familiar with those frameworks or research or or certainly the language that's used is how often they might have to read or to watch that back to try and grasp some of the concepts. So it's how do we make that more accessible for people? Do we need to look at the language, or do we need to provide more practical takeaways as to how that relates?
Yeah, Ali, you really did well to jump in there first, didn't you? Covered a lot of bases on it. I'm gonna go next. I'm gonna go next.
Okay.
I think one of the key things that I took from a number of the webinars was the importance of a reflection on your own work within what you're doing, because there is a tendency to say, well, I've done this work well over here, and if I try that over here, it should work as well. And that's not the case. So being able to reflect on maybe even the subtleties and how you implement something was something I definitely took away from a number of the webinars. Another thing, and I think it came from the kind of latter stages of our webinars, was that we need to take a much more holistic approach to how we coach and consider not just the environment of the training session, but the environment of the kids arriving, the environment of the athletes arriving, the environment that surrounds them, what's their support network, what's the role of the parents, what's the role of the guardian, and how everybody fits into that really well. I think that was one of the big things that I took away, is it's much more than X's and O's. And I would have always seen it as that, but I'm now even think I need to broaden my horizons even more. And the last one was almost a question that I posed to myself, but I think will be important to pose to everyone, is that, are we coaching people out of creativity? In a traditional sense, a lot of the times we prescribe so much. Does that take away from the other creativity that you have from kids as they develop and as they move up, and even at an elite level? Are we really coaching people out of creativity? And it's a question I'm going to ask myself and reflect on a lot more, but I think it's a question that everybody could do with looking at. So that's my 3.
Nice, like that.
I suppose I'll try and jump in quickly and before they all get taken away, because you two have done a good job at scratching out some of the ideas that I had lined up. I think I've got to slightly build off one of the things that Alan was saying. You can't copy paste. There's lots of really good ideas out there. You've got to take that research, take those ideas, you've got to experiment with them in your own context. But I think one of the things we've learned from the COVID situation is that we can find other ways to connect with people. And there are lots of people out there who are really interested in this stuff. And so if you want to discuss ideas with people, if you want to experiment and compare, get feedback on what you're doing with people, there are people out there that you can connect with to engage in that experimentation. And so that's one thing I definitely think is there. I think a second point is around alignment, just how important it is that everything is aligned within your program, that your what your vision, you're clear on what your vision is, so that everything can line up against that. The coaches are aligned with each other when they're engaged in their practice. Parents and coaches are aligned. So I think that the core message of alignment being really, really important to bring about some of these changes. The last one, which was made up on the spot after, as I said, Ollie and Alan took one each, and I had to think quickly, but I think it's actually a really important. When Sarah was talking at the start in the very first workshop, she was talking about flourishing. She was talking about happy athletes. And this is in, these are athletes that they hope will go on to Olympic teams. So these are athletes who are, on this high performance trajectory. And yet she was talking about flourishing. She was talking about happiness. And Sheila was talking at the end about happiness as, more active children are happier children. If that was all the benefit we got from physical activity, that would be enough. And so I think for me, this idea about happiness, don't forget happiness as a core outcome that we want from effective coaching, that it's smiles on children's faces, it is athletes who are flourishing in the more high performance environment. So those are my 3. Over to you, Ed.
Well, interesting. Well, I I've gotten to know Ollie quite well over the number of years, so I might throw one of those curveballs in at the end. So I actually was ready for it. I've been preparing for weeks for that question, because so I kind of
over my house, have you?
But I suppose it always goes back to, for me, to why we set this up in the first place. Let's go always back to 2017. We were all over in Finland. We were at that motor skill acquisition conference, and we'd already been having some conversations around different things. And we were like, there's nothing really in Ireland to kind of bring skill acquisition and movement more to the fore, to heighten people's awareness, bring it as a part of people's regular use of vocabulary and the like. Okay, and through all of that, we through all those conversations that led to the first conference in 2018, the second conference in 2020 that has been then led to this, was all about engaging with people who themselves have been on journeys and are still on journeys, and for their experiences to be shared. And I think when we look at the people we had in the first conference and in this second conference, the overarching thing, and I think one of you has said it, the overarching response is, I'm happy to chat, I'm happy to share, I'm happy to engage. And I think that's something that we need to be as coaches, but especially in the space of skill acquisition, because it gets a lot of pushback from different places at times, for us just to continue to be open to the engagement and the chat. Because my three takeaways stem from that. And the first one is patience. We need to be more patient. We all work as coaches, the four of us. We all work. I'm a volunteer coach with my kids now, but I also work as a professional coach. And the more patient I am in both of those extremes in the sporting world, the better the environment is, the better the relationship I have with the 7-year-olds who run around crazy, and I'm up there on a day off, and I'm like, what am I doing on my day off here? And equally with the professional athletes, where it's like, if I can be a bit more patient, you know what? Something else is going to emerge here, that if I can just stop trying to get them to do and see the world through my eyes, and maybe if I need to shift that. So patience is a big one for me. The second thing that I thought was throughout this first season was adaptability, and all the many ways we can get athletes to become more and more adaptable. Skill acquisition for me is not an end point. It is to acquire skills that are adaptable and acquire movements that are adaptable. And hence the reason the four of us went with Movement and Skill Acquisition Ireland, because it encapsulates so much about what it is in sports. So adaptability was a major thread for me. And the last one, which I think you've all mentioned at one point in time, is that creativity, whether we're stifling it or whether we're actually encouraging it. And I think that's something, as a coach, I am constantly reminding myself to be aware. Am I in the way here? Mm-hmm. And if I'm in the way, shut up and get out of the way. Or if I'm not in the way, if I feel that what's being created here is actually enhancing their creativity, just go even further into it. Allow that space and time for creativity, for their creativity to significantly impact it. So patience, adaptability, and creativity. As the first season, I just think it's been fantastic. Again, back to the kind of selfishness point. I know the four of us, we get so much out of this, and it's because of these people's willingness to share. Willing to share, so willing to get on a call, and to all the things that, Ollie, like you're doing almost from the nerve center of it all. Test calls, no problem. We get on a test call and we'll check that. And I think people need to realize there's so many more, and there's way more of that type of coach and practitioner out there than not. And they're, and if we can in some small way make these people known to others, job done.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, thanks again to all the speakers and for their time. And, all of them are so accessible. And for anybody watching this, if you were to follow up and find these people on Twitter, you'll find that, they will make time to have those coaching conversations with you. So, please do follow up on that. And again, I think, it's a bit webinar mad out there at the moment. So, and I know we had reservations about potentially, adding to that, but I've been really pleasantly surprised at some of the feedback that we're getting, and clearly we're adding value into that. It's busy for everyone, but again, we'll probably come back to this in a year or two, and some of the content that are available in the videos, like it is really, really good. So it's great to have that freely accessible, and as a resource for people and for us as well, just to reflect on some things.
Yeah, I've been very, very pleased with being able to engage in all of the webinars so far. I think when we made a decision, which was clearly the right decision, to cancel the conference because it just couldn't go ahead, there was a significant deflate moment of, oh, I was really looking forward to that. And the fact that we are able to still share content, probably with a little bit of a larger reach than we thought we would have been able to, it is just a great thing to come from this for me. I've really enjoyed each webinar so far.
So, go on. Phil, you were going to chat there?
I was just going to reiterate that again, just to say it's been really fantastic to see the response, first of all from the speakers, because we wouldn't be able to do this if they weren't so generous with their time, and setting up and saying, yeah, absolutely. That's been really fantastic. But again, also, I just want to reiterate in terms of the feedback and the comments that we're getting back. We're really keen to hear from people in terms of what their feedback is, what their views are on how the different sessions have worked, bits that they liked, bits that they want to see more of. So please engage with us, find us on Twitter or via our emails, and let us know your thoughts, because we're very keen for this to be a functional group, to assist coaches, and your feedback is a really important part in helping us to do that.
I agree, and I think one of the things on that, I 100% agree there with you, Phil, is one of the big things for me was the questions that the speakers were being asked during the web. It gave me a real sense of there's some exceptional people out there doing really good work. You know by the quality of their questions. And I think one of the things that was nice about, again, all our speakers, there was no airs and graces about the speakers. They were all speaking and answering questions as peers. There was no sense of status or anything, which again in the coaching environment is so essential for things to grow. So yeah, I think it is worth mentioning that webinars are great. I hope they don't replace the real thing, the face-to-face contact of workshops, seminars. I think even our speakers would say that the KYI, the Keep Youngsters Involved, the I Coach Kids, we've seen what they're like in practical sessions, and they're incredible. I know the work that Mark Dennis do up in AIK, and Jorg and Jan do in Dutch football. They were practical sessions we were hoping to have in Cork. That we will endeavor to get them to in live sessions, because there's so much more to be garnered from the actual coaching environment. So I know we've just put out a season 1 and we'd hope to do a season 2, but it's never to replace the actual hands-on face-to-face contact with coaches in the coaching environment. And I think that's something we will always strive to continue to do at Movement and Skill Acquisition Ireland.
Yeah, I think I was on that point. So the what next? So I suppose we're all going to get our Friday evenings back for a little bit, and we have a few ideas for another series. So keep an eye on Twitter and on Facebook, and we'll let you know when those ideas maybe have come to fruition, and we can go for another series. But yeah, I think last, was it 9 weeks? Yeah, really enjoyed it. Yeah. Actually, look forward to seeing you guys on a Friday evening now. It's quite nice.
The only thing that made me realize what day it was.
Exactly. It became webinar day as opposed to Friday.
So yeah,
thanks guys.
If you do want to catch up on all of the previous webinars, you can see those on our YouTube page, which is MSA Ireland. Our Facebook page is Skill Acquisition, and our Twitter handle is @MSA Ireland. So check those out. Keep an eye. Subscribe to us on YouTube and follow us on Twitter, and you'll get more news as it comes out about Series 2. So yeah, I guess we'll hopefully see you guys all soon.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.